Ghislain's outrageous string of antics had, inevitably, brought him back into her presence. She stood still, her voice cold and clipped as she demanded to know why he had entered her room without permission. With an unfaltering calm and the soft cadence of sincerity, Ghislain responded. He conveyed that he had come with the purpose of curing her, a bold claim delivered with conviction. Since she had already tested the cosmetic he had crafted, he asked if it had produced any noticeable improvement on her afflicted skin. Rosalind offered no answer. Instead, her silence transformed into rage as she hurled the jar at his face with all the spite she could muster. He shifted ever so slightly, letting the jar fly past without harm. Her anger was justified, he thought, but he also knew that dragging her through the hellish treatment he had known was the only way to deliver her from the torment she endured. No gentle path would lead her to salvation. She dropped to her knees, fury lacing her voice as she screamed that he was not the first to make such lofty promises. Others had tried before, each proclaiming certainty, each failing. She no longer cared about the cure or the healer. The medicine, the methods, none of it mattered anymore. All she desired was for him to leave her be, convinced that hope was a cruel illusion she could no longer afford. Ghislain's resolve didn't waver. He spoke again, this time with sterner weight in his tone, asserting that he was not like the others. He was prepared to gamble his life for the sake of her recovery. That declaration only incited her further. Turning her back, she raged that such words were always the same. Greedy men disguised as saviors, all claiming they were different, all swearing upon their lives. Yet none stayed, none endured. It meant nothing to her that Ghislain's cosmetic was selling across the kingdom. In her eyes, he was no different, a liar like the rest. Still, Ghislain remained unmoved, quietly conveying his understanding. He acknowledged that her pain had run deep, built upon years of betrayal and crushed expectations. Inwardly, his thoughts turned to who Rosalind truly was. A noble woman with the blood of two of the kingdom's most powerful lines. Her father, the uncompromising leader of the royalist faction, and her mother, the brilliant daughter of the chancellor. After the death of her mother, Rosalind Bramford had become the unshakable pillar of her house. She was not merely beautiful or well-born. She was a prodigy in her own right. A master of both pen and sword, she wielded elegance and intellect in equal measure. She was grace and fire, a force to be reckoned with, and all of it achieved while still in the flower of youth. At a remarkably young age, she mastered channeling mana through the blade while establishing herself as a foremost patron of Cardea's varied industries. Contracts, workshops, and guilds bore her seal, and the map of commerce brightened wherever her attention settled. Then an unknown skin disease overturned that carefully built life completely, replacing audiences with physicians and salons with shuttered rooms. Isolation grew where reputation had once flourished, and rumors trailed the silence like smoke. The Marquis family, armed with wealth and influence, pursued every possible remedy. Nothing worked. As desperation mounted, her father looked to secure her future through a political marriage. She could no longer live as the dazzling star she had once been. But at the very least, the Bramford name could still provide shelter. Her condition was no ordinary ailment. It was a consequence of a rare, catastrophic reaction caused by misaligned training in mana cultivation. The balance between positive and negative mana, known as the polarities, had collapsed, disrupting her mana road entirely. The eruption that followed left scars beyond the surface. And now, as she stood once more before hollow promises and uncertain hope, Rosalind chose fury. She raised her sword, raw mana surging from her body in reckless waves, and lunged toward Ghislain, threatening to kill him if he didn't leave that very instant. But Ghislain, with a softness that betrayed no fear, apologized. He explained that he would now have to proceed by force, not out of cruelty, but because he understood that her use of mana in such a chaotic state would only exacerbate her illness further. Before she could continue her rampage, Ghislain sprang into motion. With startling speed, he closed the distance, drawing his sword in preparation to counter her strike. Rosalind's eyes widened in disbelief at his agility. Even so, she brought her blade down, intending to cleave him in two. But Ghislain's sword was already there, its hilt intercepting hers with practiced precision. In that instant, He pushed forward, overpowering her, disarming her momentum, and seizing her arm with unyielding grip. In one seamless motion, he spun and slammed her to the floor, subduing her flailing form. He wasted no time calling for Belinda and Wendy to come aid in restraining her. Within seconds, the two attendants stormed into the room, bringing a mattress as instructed, following their lord's command without hesitation. Working with practiced efficiency, Belinda and Wendy bound Rosalind to the bed before further thrashing could worsen the delicate condition. Rage continued to pour through her, and she demanded release at once, while Claude entered to support Ghislain in the attempt to effect a cure. Before any procedure could begin, Ghislain indicated that the helmet would have to be removed. As the coat came off his shoulders, he added that he needed to inspect Rosalind's condition personally. As Belinda reached to remove Rosalind's helmet, the restrained noblewoman fought back with whatever strength remained, shouting that she didn't need help, that she refused to accept any treatment from him. Claude paused, unsettled by the sight revealed beneath steel and leather, while Belinda and Wendy drew tight breaths at the ruin shown to their eyes. Ghislain alone reacted without surprise, as if the horrid transformation matched what he had already been assumed. He moved immediately, directing Claude to assist while he retrieved a vial of the medicine he had prepared. He informed Rosalind that the coming week would be agony, but if she could endure the pain, then recovery was possible. Rosalind's response came through gritted teeth. She cursed him, hissed that he must have a death wish. She still didn't believe in him, not even slightly. To her, it was all another sick illusion. But Ghislain was unfazed and her doubt did not bother him. Without pausing, he carefully tilted her head back and forced the first dose of the medicine into her mouth, resolute in his mission to save her, whether she believed in it or not. As Ghislain moved to begin the treatment, desperation laced his voice. He pleaded with a trembling urgency, insisting that if he did not proceed, not only would she die, so would he. The weight of the truth lay bare in his eyes, unshielded and raw, already hollowed by despair. Rosalind felt the helplessness take its final toll. This treatment was being forced upon her. There was no longer any space for resistance, no room for pride. As she listened to Ghislain's voice crack with sincerity, a tear escaped her eye, unbidden, betraying the emotion she had tried so hard to suppress. Ghislain inhaled deeply, steadying himself. With solemn resolve, he summoned his mana. A clear, cerulean ember burst to life around his left hand, glowing like a flame frozen in time. In his heart, he whispered a silent reassurance to her not to be afraid. He would make this work. He had to. He knew all too well the irony of what he was about to do. The method he would use, the one he had staked his life on, had not been created by him. It was a technique invented by none other than Rosalind herself. Compared to the woman he had heard his past life, this Rosalind, though brilliant, lacked the same fierce resilience, the same unyielding willpower. He wasn't certain whether she could withstand what was to come, but certainty had never been a prerequisite for his conviction. So, Ghislain pressed forward, his glowing hand pressed gently against her abdomen, and at once a radiant blue mana spread from the point of contact like ink in water. The warmth of the mana mingled with a subtle heat as it coursed through her body, seeking out the channels shaped by her cultivation and trailing the medicine already within her bloodstream. Rosalind's body jerked. It was as though something inside her had cracked. No, shattered. Then came the pain. It wasn't ordinary. It wasn't even the type of pain that one could steel themselves against. It was excruciating in a way that transcended comprehension, primal, consuming. Every time Ghislain's mana broke through the frozen walls within her mana road, it was as if invisible blades pierced her from the inside. She screamed, violently, uncontrollably, and no forcible could restrain it. Through pain that refused to ebb, Rosalind questioned why the burden had chosen her, why among so many it fastened claws into her life and demanded a week of endurance that seemed designed to break her spirit as well as her body. The thought alone made her heart quake with fury and despair. In the glare of that thought, Ghislain's implacable warning returned to her awareness, the reminder that neglecting treatment would claim his life along with hers, a paired fate that made hesitation feel like complicity. Her shrieks halted, if only for a moment. She gritted her teeth hard enough to draw blood. And in that silent instant, she fixed her gaze on him. red eyes burning through the blur of tears and pain. If death was inevitable, then so be it. But if they were to walk this road together, then he had no right to hold back. She demanded that he give it everything, every breath, every drop of effort, until the very end. Her glare carried the full weight of her soul. Her voice, hoarse yet thunderous, tore through the room as she warned him. If he dared to mess this up, if he faltered even once, she would kill him with her own 2 hands. Her declaration rang in Ghislain's ears with deafening clarity. The screaming resumed immediately after, rawer than before. She cursed him, insulted him, hurled profanity after profanity between each cry of pain. The storm outside roared in tandem, thunder cracking through the sky as if answering her fury. Elsewhere, within the grim stone walls of the eerie castle now, encircled by the kingdom's soldiers, the mercenaries remained oblivious to the trial unfolding behind closed doors. Alpoy paced furiously, heat radiating from his clenched jaw. He was convinced that his foolish master, the so-called northern scoundrel, must have landed them in another impossible mess. Gordon suggested they should go find their captain rather than waiting in anxious silence. Before they could act, footsteps echoed down the staircase. Ghislain and Kaer descended into the main hall, lugging barrels of drink with them. As they reached the ground, Ghislain casually dismissed the idea of searching for Ghislain. Their indifference puzzled the rest of the group. But Kaer simply smirked, encouraging them to relax and drink to their heart's content. Ghislain, he insisted, was not one to act without a plan. And so, the castle settled into uneasy stillness. Dawn of the 7th day broke on Cardea, sunlight parting the thinning cloud and laying bright panes of warmth across slate roofs and wet streets. A gentler counterpoint to nights filled with storm and shouting. Impatience had already won as Marquis Branford mounted the stairs without pause, intent on learning immediately whether the week of ordeal had yielded anything more than exhaustion. The door to Rosalind's room burst open. The Marquis entered, flanked by knights, his expression unreadable. The scent hit first, a suffocating mix of sweat, blood, and stale air. The floor had been soaked red. Rosalind's blood had painted the room like the remnants of a battle. Her bindings had long since been removed. She now lay motionless upon the bed, a white cloth draped over her face. At first glance, one might have thought her lifeless. She had endured it all. The entire week of torment, of fire and agony. The exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. The very thought of Ghislain's voice made her want to tear him apart, but she lacked even the strength to issue a command. Ghislain stood beside her, equally worn down. He had spent 7 days directing his mana with utmost precision, methodically thawing the frozen pathways inside her. Blood stained his form. Her suffering had been internal, brutal, just like his own. Turning his head, he met the Marquis's gaze. The man had entered silently, already standing behind him. One brief look from Marquis Branford conveyed the expectation plainly. A sovereign request for proof that intention had become result, and that this attempt differed from the long chain of failures. Ghislain answered without words as his hand reached for the linen veil resting over Rosalind's face. The motion slow, deliberate, and exact, as if speed itself might bruise what fragile balance had just been reclaimed. The instant Marquis Branford set eyes on his daughter's face, disbelief widened his gaze. After staking life, loyalty, and estate alike, the northern scoundrel known for a single turbulent week had achieved the impossible. Marquis Branford stood still, gazing at Rosalind with a storm of emotion roiling behind his stern expression. After a long, waited moment, he commanded everyone to leave. His daughter needed time. Time to rest, to breathe, and to come to terms with all that had happened. Outside the estate, whispers were already swirling through the streets. The miraculous tale of the Branford family's heir being cured spread like wildfire. Few believed it because too many had tried and failed. Too many had died chasing the same hope. And yet, the news that the Marquis would soon be hosting a grand banquet lent weight to the rumors. Perhaps the impossible had truly occurred. Later that day, after having finally cleaned himself and gathered his thoughts, Ghislain entered the Marquis's office with his aides. It was time to speak of what would come next. The hall quieted as the guests respectfully lowered their heads in a formal bow, acknowledging the success that had unfolded before them. Marquis Branford let out a scoffing breath, his tone layered with reluctant admiration. He remarked that, contrary to his initial judgment, Ghislain had proven himself to be more than mere talk. Though the Marquis had lost the wager, he bore no regret. Witnessing the miraculous recovery of his daughter, after years of failed attempts and endless pain, was a victory far more valuable than any bet. It was, in truth, a profound consolation that transcended pride. With respectful composure, Ghislain responded, stating humbly that it was only possible because the Marquis had dared to take the risk and grant him a chance to act. Wasting no time with pleasantries, Marquis Branford turned the conversation toward the matter at its heart. A promise, he declared, must be honored. With firm resolve, he asked Ghislain to name the reward he desired in return. Attention gathered around Ghislain. Curiosity set faces alight as the hall drew taut with suspense over what demand might rise before a figure as powerful as Branford. Whispered predictions sketched extravagant tributes, alliances, or coin, each theory more elaborate than the last. Ghislain inhaled deeply, raising his head with steady determination. His voice was calm as he declared that his request was not something grand or impossible. At this, the Marquis arched a brow, intrigued, and gave him permission to speak without restraint. In that moment, Ghislain asked Marquis Branford to become his guardian. The weight of the words landed like a thunderclap. Shock painted every face, and Marquis Branford's surprise was especially visible, his eyes widening in disbelief. The air in the room seemed as still as everyone processed what had just been said. Standing nearby, Belinda responded with spontaneous enthusiasm. Her hands shot up in joy as her entire face lit with excitement. Internally, she beamed with pride, thinking to herself that this was exactly like her young lord, to leap boldly into the unknown, unafraid to make outrageous requests that others would never dare voice aloud. Claude, by contrast, shook his head in private calculation, fully recognizing that a guardian would shoulder responsibility for Ghislain's actions regardless of outcome. Power required shelter as well as vision, and a guardian's mantle could grant both while legitimizing ambition. Marquis Branford, recovering from his surprise, gave a measured response. He remarked that Ghislain had initially called this a small favor, but it was now perfectly clear that the young baron had approached him with intention from the very beginning. Ghislain acknowledged the weight of his request as well. He understood fully that what he sought was not simple patronage. To ask for guardianship was to bind Marquis Branford to every consequence of his actions. It was an alliance formed not just in name, but in accountability and risk. Despite the tension, the Marquis gave a slow shake of his head. He stated that he had already placed his hopes on another lord in the north, and therefore could not grant Ghislain's request. His tone was regretful, but resolute. Unshaken, Ghislain asked without hesitation whether the man Branford referred to was Count Brivant. That question struck a nerve. Marquis Branford narrowed his eyes. That name had never been discussed beyond the innermost circle of the royalist faction. For Ghislain to pinpoint it so directly was deeply unsettling. Pressing further, the Marquis listed other notable northern lords, Rayfold and Desmond among them, and asked Ghislain what made him believe that Brivant, specifically, was the intended candidate. Ghislain responded without pause. He revealed his understanding that Desmond merely maintained a facade of neutrality. In truth, no one truly understood where Desmond's allegiance lay. Meanwhile, House Rayfold was embroiled in an internal struggle, leaving their future uncertain and fractured. The remaining lords, Ghislain asserted, were either too weak, too greedy, or too lacking in capability to be considered for such a critical role. However, Count Brivant stood apart. He was undeniably wealthy, closely aligned with the royalist faction, and perhaps most importantly, commanded the formidable magical might of the Scarlet Magic Tower. Based on all these factors, Ghislain had deduced that Brivant's territory was the most likely target for the Marquis's influence. With a sigh, the Marquis asked whether Ghislain was implying that he was more suitable than Brivant. Ghislain met his gaze without flinching and advised the Marquis to be honest with himself. He suggested that Count Brivant was not the dependable ally the Marquis needed. He was lacking, unsatisfyingly so. For a moment, Marquis Branford said nothing. He studied Ghislain intently, his mind reeling at the sheer precision of the young man's insight. Every step Ghislain had taken since arriving in the capital, every calculated risk, every conversation, had been leading to this. Then, unexpectedly, Marquis Branford let out a hearty laugh. He admitted aloud that Ghislain's assumptions were correct. Count Brivant was indeed a kind man, and capable in many respects, but he was also lazy, easily manipulated, and slow to act. Such qualities were fatal flaws in the current political climate. Building upon this, Ghislain remarked that those very flaws had left Brivant vulnerable to influence from the Delphine family, longtime enemies of the Royalist faction. Having laid out the case, Ghislain asked that, if a wish would be granted, boldness should rule the choice. He renewed the request that Marquis Branford recognize him as the effective representative of the northern region, a standard-bearer able to marshal resources and will. Marquis Branford fell into contemplative silence. The boy's ambitions were grand, but not baseless. Ghislain's cosmetic ventures were already gaining traction. Within a few years, he would undoubtedly emerge as a significant figure in the kingdom's economy. Furthermore, with his father, Count Perdium, having recently absorbed Dygald's territory, the Fenris family's influence was poised to grow even further. A little more backing could elevate Ghislain into a powerful cornerstone of the Royalist faction. Everything now made sense. The risk Ghislain had taken wasn't just for Rosalind. It was part of a much broader, calculated move. Finally, Marquis Branford rose to his feet, his voice rising to fill the chamber. With everyone present as witnesses, he declared his decision. He, Marquis Branford, would formally act as guardian to Baron Ghislain Fenris. His voice grew firmer as he proclaimed that any who opposed Ghislain would now be opposing Branford himself. Let it be known, he said, that whoever stood against the Baron would face the full weight of his authority. With that, the Marquis demanded that Ghislain pledge his honor in return. Every future action, every step forward, would carry the responsibility of upholding the Branford name. Without hesitation, Ghislain unsheathed his sword, dropped to one knee, and accepted the condition without ornament or delay. It was a solemn vow, an oath to uphold the dignity of his guardian. The moment was still fresh when Rosalind entered the office, her steps quiet but composed. She offered her congratulations to Ghislain, remarking that, amidst the chaos of recent days, she hadn't yet had the chance to properly greet him. Behind a delicate fan painted in deep blue hues, a mischievous smile lingered on Rosalind's lips as she addressed him. Though her father had already granted him a reward, she claimed with an air of grace that the one who truly owed him a debt of gratitude was none other than herself. With a subtle snap of her wrist, the fan unfurled. Her face, once marred by angry red blotches and chronic affliction, now shone with a flawless, radiant glow. There was no longer any sign of illness. Her features were cold yet dignified, her lips drawn in a firm, composed line. In every detail of her bearing, she now resembled the unshakable authority of her father. Time flowed swiftly, and before long, the grand banquet arrived. The corridors and chambers of the estate buzzed with whispers. Guests murmured, exchanging curious glances as they discussed the astonishing rumor that the once sickly Branford heiress had been cured. Whispered accounts insisted that an obscure noble had accomplished the cure with cosmetics, a tale that wandered from salon to carriage until minds stitched the story to Deneb, the line championed by Countess Muriel, and named it the miracle responsible for Rosalind's recovery. Some, however, argued that no mere cosmetic could mend what physicians and magi together had failed to touch, while others countered that Marquis Branford would never host a banquet without cause. The ledger of his actions traditionally balanced reason with grandeur. As if to add weight to the circulating stories, more speculation followed. The Marquis, it was said, had named a new guardian in the northern region. And just then, as if summoned by the current of rumor itself, Ghislain arrived. Every head turned in unison. Conversations halted mid-sentence as all eyes fixed on Baron Fenris. His presence commanded attention, though he himself looked thoroughly uninterested. By his side walked Belinda, dressed well beyond the expectations for a maid. Traditionally, someone of her station would never be permitted to attend such a prestigious gathering, but Ghislain, indifferent to formalities, had brought her as his companion. Noticing Ghislain's casual demeanor, Belinda leaned in with quiet insistence, scolding him for keeping his hand in his pocket and reminding him to offer a smile. Her voice was firm, as if scolding a wayward child, and though annoyed by the interruption, Ghislain obeyed without protest. Amused, he cast a glance her way and commented on how well she had dressed for the evening. With mild sarcasm, he noted that she might even be overdressed. Belinda smiled, proud but restrained, and admitted that this was likely the only opportunity she would ever have to attend a banquet of such scale. This was no ordinary celebration. It was being held by the kingdom's most influential man on behalf of Ghislain himself. She would not allow herself to be underestimated or looked down upon. Ghislain turned his gaze toward the grand hall, musing inwardly that, truthfully, this event wasn't exactly being held for him, at least not entirely. The soft sound of the announcer's voice echoed through the chamber, heralding the arrival of the evening's host. All movement ceased. A hush fell across the noble gathering as Marquis Branford entered the hall with regal authority. But he did not arrive alone. Walking beside him, poised and dignified, was Rosalind. Her face remained half covered by the fan in her hand, revealing only glimpses of her now restored complexion. This was the first time she had stepped out into the eyes of high society since her long confinement. With every step down the grand staircase, Rosalind radiated composure. Her descent into the hall was met with complete silence. The sound of her shoes against polished marble echoed through the space, underscoring the weight of her presence. Once she reached the center of the gathering, she gracefully unfurled her fan, revealing her full face to the assembly of nobles. The transformation was breathtaking. Rosalind Branford, daughter of Marquis Branford, stood tall and smiled, greeting the assembled guests with polite warmth. She voiced her hope that each of them had been in good health and high spirits. The room erupted in applause and celebratory cheers. The rumors had proven true. She had, indeed, been cured. Among the cries of joy, one voice shouted out that she looked even more beautiful than before her seclusion. Standing nearby, Belinda narrowed her eyes, murmuring under her breath that she had nearly failed to recognize the girl. No one, seeing Rosalind now, would believe that this elegant figure was the same person who had, not long ago, screamed profanities and promised unspeakable pain to her healer. Rosalind had endured every moment of torment without once begging for mercy. She had accused Ghislain of being a fraud, called him a quack, and had even promised to kill him should she survive the pain. Her fury had been unmatched. Now, amidst the hundreds gathered in celebration, Rosalind's gaze sought only one person. Among the noble crowd, it was Ghislain who captured her attention. Her smile, while poised, held an unnerving quality, a subtle, enigmatic curve that unsettled Ghislain more than any curse. Her calm demeanor masked something deeper, and he knew it. Even without the power of her father, Rosalind wielded formidable influence. If resentment lingered in her heart, the consequences could be far-reaching. Ghislain was well aware that he had provoked her harder than most would dare. At last, Marquis Branford raised his voice, addressing the room with commanding clarity. He thanked the assembled nobles for attending, offering his sincere gratitude for their presence. He explained that the purpose of the evening was twofold. First, to celebrate the miraculous recovery of his beloved daughter, Rosalind. Then came the second announcement, one that silenced the room. The Marquis declared that he had officially chosen his ward, a decision that had sparked rumors in the capital and now stood confirmed. He stated, to the astonishment of many, that a single man had made it all possible. It was thanks to this individual, this unassuming young noble, that Rosalind had finally been freed from the chains of her affliction. Some in the room already knew his name. Others did not, but all listened closely. Marquis Branford announced his guardianship over Baron Ghislain Fenris, a young lord who had arrived from the distant and impoverished Blackwater territory in the far north, alone, unknown, and with nothing, and who now stood under the protection of one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. With unwavering authority, the Marquis vowed to fulfill his duty as guardian to the fullest extent. From that moment forward, he declared, all nobles present were to treat Ghislain as they would treat the Marquis himself. Although the Marquis had phrased his declaration as a mere suggestion, every noble present, especially those affiliated with the royalist faction, understood the weight behind his words. It was not a request. It was a command, veiled in civility, that none of them could afford to ignore. Eyes from all corners of the hall shifted toward Ghislain, and a rising tide of hushed murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. To many in attendance, Ghislain was nothing more than the heir to Margrave Perdium, a title inherited from a remote and impoverished northern territory. In their eyes, his background lacked the pedigree or prestige necessary to warrant an alliance with someone of Marquis Branford's standing. Yet Ghislain appeared unfazed. He understood now that Marquis Branford was a man of deliberation, someone who weighed his decisions carefully, but once resolved, committed without hesitation. It was this resolute nature that gave strength to the words spoken that day. His thoughts drifted briefly to a private conversation they had shared. The Marquis had insisted he attend the banquet, reminding Ghislain that, as his guardian, it was his duty to introduce him to the other nobles within the faction. In doing so, Branford hoped to ease future collaborations and open doors to much-needed support. Scanning the hall, Ghislain took note of the many influential figures in attendance. Nearly all the kingdom's prominent nobles were here, and despite the burden of standing before them, he came to recognize the value of the event. This evening could, indeed, serve as a vital stepping stone. Still, the murmurs persisted. Voices questioned his youth, speculated on his worthiness, and expressed doubt over the Marquis's seemingly sudden endorsement. Perdium, after all, was a territory known more for its poverty than power. Belinda, standing nearby, clenched her fists inwardly. She could feel her anger stir at the arrogance of these nobles, their ignorance grating like sandpaper. But before she could act or speak, Rosalind took a step forward. Ever perceptive, Rosalind had already formulated a response. She descended the steps and approached Ghislain, each movement measured with poise. In front of the entire hall, she curtsied before him with flawless form, her gaze never leaving his. With that single gesture, she made a statement more powerful than any speech. Her father may have declared himself Ghislain's guardian, but Rosalind's public gratitude was a personal acknowledgement, one that resonated deeply among the watching nobles. It was clear that the Branford family, as a whole, stood united in their support. In the privacy of their brief exchange, Rosalind subtly advised Ghislain to ignore the background noise. Petty rumors, she noted, were inevitable for anyone who drew attention. The louder the voices, the more relevant the subject. She reminded him that today was significant, not just because it marked her return to public life, but also because her father's allegiance had been made known. The nobles would be restless now, uncertain how to react to the unexpected alignment. Their curiosity would soon give way to action. Extending her hand, she invited Ghislain to accompany her in greeting the key figures of the royalist circle. It was both a courtesy and a challenge, and every pair of eyes followed the motion. Some in the crowd remained skeptical, clinging to old prejudices against the northern lord. Others, however, found themselves captivated by Rosalind's beauty and poise, now elevated by the mystery surrounding her recovery. As for Ghislain, he recognized Rosalind as a complex force, difficult to predict, but essential to understand. To Rosalind, he appeared equally intriguing, someone whose boldness might serve him well if tempered wisely. Ghislain glanced back, seeking Belinda's approval. She simply smiled and waved him on, a quiet affirmation that she would remain in the background, allowing him to face the highborn elite on his own. Taking Rosalind's hand, Ghislain allowed himself to be led through the crowd. She explained, with cool precision, the internal structure of the royalist faction. The faction, she said, could broadly be divided into three dominant groups. The first was led by Countess Muriel, matriarch of the affluent house of Aylesbury. Her family held sway over the capital's economy and culture, commanding immense influence within the city's markets and salons. The second group was overseen by the Chief Justice of the realm, Sir Bylor Norton, Rosalind's own uncle and the eldest son of the Royal Chancellor. He controlled the kingdom's legal and administrative affairs with a meticulous hand. The third and final pillar of power was Marquis Maurice Macquarie, the commander-in-chief of the kingdom's military forces. His domain included most of the army's senior officers, and his voice carried authority across all matters concerning national defense. Together, these three figures represented the administrative, economic, and military backbone of the Lithania kingdom. Rosalind warned that, as the newly declared representative of the northern region, Ghislain's choice of whom to greet first would carry symbolic weight. It would shape perceptions elevate egos or bruise pride. A sharp wave of anxiety struck him as her words echoed the earlier warning from Marquis Branford. The world he now stepped into was foreign, ruthless in its own way, and dictated by invisible rules. Though Branford's support was reassuring, it also placed a crushing burden on his shoulders. A single misstep tonight could sow discord with powerful allies. Ghislain let out a long, resigned sigh. No matter whom he approached first, offense would surely be taken by the others. His thoughts returned to Count Aylesbury and his wife. He had already become somewhat familiar with them, and he knew that their factions' influence over commerce aligned well with his own ventures. Across the room, he noticed Count Bylor Norton smiling at him with warmth. The man had a reputation for adoring his niece, and Ghislain suspected that curing Rosalind had earned him no small measure of favor. Yet it was Marquis Macquarie who posed the greatest challenge. Known for his pride and temper, he was not someone to take lightly. Wanting to rip the bandage off quickly, Ghislain made his decision. He stepped forward and approached Count Aylesbury, offering a formal greeting and introducing himself with proper decorum. From across the room, Marquis Macquarie stiffened. The gesture had not gone unnoticed. His pride took a hit, evident in the flicker of annoyance in his expression. To be overlooked so openly would surely sting. But Count Aylesbury welcomed Ghislain with a kind smile, clearly pleased. While often viewed as the least threatening among the faction leaders, receiving the first greeting from Branford's ward had elevated his status in the eyes of many. Countess Mary fanned herself and let out a melodious chuckle. With theatrical flair, she affectionately called Ghislain her little brother, praising his loyalty with exaggerated admiration. Ghislain responded with a gentle reminder that formal occasions called for more appropriate conduct, but she waved him off, insisting such rules need not apply when the bonds were so warm. She even thanked him openly, acknowledging that this public gesture had helped salvage her standing among the nobility. Marquis Macquarie cleared his throat with deliberate volume to ensure Ghislain heard, staking a claim to attention befitting the man who controlled the kingdom's military and resented any hint of slight. An aide amplified the signal by declaring that a Margrave's son ought naturally to pay respects to the commander first, while another aide, less cautious, implied that Marquis Branford's judgment had dulled with age to mistake the order of precedence. Ghislain, of course, recognized the game being played. The criticism was thinly veiled, and Macquarie's expectation of deference was clear. The military lord was not a man who tolerated disrespect. As Ghislain began moving in the direction of the nobles, all present assumed that he would do the expected, that he would approach Macquarie next and pay the appropriate homage. After all, even arrogance had its limits. But those expectations were swiftly shattered. Without breaking stride, Ghislain walked directly past the Marquis, offering no bow, no nod, not even a glance. The Marquis's face darkened in fury, his jaw tightening as Ghislain headed straight toward Count Bylor Norton. There, Ghislain greeted the Chief Justice with composed civility. He thanked him for his kind words and acknowledged the burden that had been lifted from the man's heart with Rosalind's recovery. Count Norton, warm and affable, was not offended to be greeted second. In fact, he seemed relieved. He even went so far as to extend an offer of practical support, assistance in acquiring skilled dwarven and elven slaves to help develop Ghislain's territory. Only after finishing his exchange with Count Norton did Ghislain, finally, turn to approach Marquis Macquarie. But by then, the slight had been fully delivered, and the damage was done. Marquis Macquarie's rage boiled visibly beneath the surface. His tone was scathing as he warned Ghislain not to become conceited simply because Marquis Branford had taken him under his wing. He reminded the young baron that distant lords, no matter how favored, could be cut off with a single command. In response, Ghislain remained composed. With grace, he acknowledged his own shortcomings and humbly requested the Marquis's continued guidance in the future. Across the room, Marquis Branford watched with a private curl of amusement as Macquarie's temper flared, mentally reducing the quarrel to the rough abrasions of a countryside brat, and then smoothing the moment with invented reasons why the greeting might have come last. Once the formalities with the kingdom's power players had ended, Rosalind approached Ghislain again. She asked whether the order in which he had greeted them had been intentional. Ghislain, feeling a flicker of nervousness, simply replied that he had allowed his heart to guide him in the moment. The exchange ended as nobles, encouraged by the evening's thaw, converged upon the pair. One after another approached Ghislain with polished compliments and, in some cases, carefully chosen gifts meant to signal early allegiance. Meanwhile, Count Aylesbury, his wife, and Count Norton observed the spectacle from a quiet corner of the hall. Despite the outward smiles and compliments directed toward Ghislain, the trio knew better. Beneath the noble civility, there lingered a subtle layer of disdain. Count Aylesbury chuckled softly, commenting on how thoroughly Ghislain had managed to earn Marquis Macquarie's resentment. Countess Muriel dismissed the concern. Macquarie, she said, was a simple man. Count Norton, more pragmatic, observed that despite the general's displeasure, Macquarie could not afford to act against Ghislain. It was at that moment that Marquis Branford joined their conversation. He stated with calm confidence that of course Macquarie couldn't move against Ghislain. After all, it had been Ghislain, and Ghislain alone, who had achieved what no one else could, curing Rosalind's illness. Count Norton offered a compliment, praising the Marquis for discovering such an extraordinary talent. But Branford deflected the praise. He admitted that, while many had failed to recognize Ghislain's worth, he had merely chosen to believe. The success, he insisted, belonged entirely to Ghislain himself. It was Ghislain's own tenacity and strength that had raised him from obscurity to stand in the presence of the kingdom's elite. The Marquis went on, elaborating that Ghislain possessed the rare ability to transform a losing battle into victory. He had a mind not only for warfare, but for strategy, able to observe the flow of events and predict what lay beyond the horizon. In Branford's estimation, Ghislain was worthy of the North and deserving of his backing. Still, he added, such a sudden rise came with risk. The brighter the light, the deeper the shadow it cast. And with so much attention now focused on Ghislain, those shadows would only grow. It was then that the hall fell eerily silent. At the entrance, the voice of an attendant rang out, trembling with uncertainty as it announced a name, Viscount Joseph. The name echoed like a cold wind through the hall. Conversations halted midward, and glasses were lowered without a sound. Ghislain's entire expression changed in an instant, hardening into a mask of composure. Guests forced smiles onto their faces as they turned toward the grand doors. Every noble knew the name, Viscount Raoul Joseph, often called the Crippled Devil. Known for his ruthless intellect and merciless tactics, he was one of the most feared men in the political sphere. The man now entered the hall with a deliberate gait, leaning on a cane due to his badly deformed leg. Yet there was nothing feeble about him. His aura was like iron, unyielding, forceful, commanding. Every step he took seemed to sap the warmth from the room. Ghislain's fists clenched at his sides. His jaw tightened as he forced down the murderous intent rising within him. This was the enemy, the one who had once stood in the way of everything. He was also the closest advisor to Duke Delphine, the royalist faction's greatest adversary, and a strategist behind many of the ducal family's most cunning moves. His unexpected presence at a royalist banquet sent a shiver through the room. To Ghislain, this was more than just a surprise. Though this marked their first encounter in this timeline, he knew the man all too well from his previous life. Viscount Joseph had played a critical role in undermining his plans during the failed campaign to burn the Delphine estate to the ground. He had been the one to outmaneuver Ghislain's mercenaries and deliver a crushing blow to his ambitions. And following behind him was another figure, a tall, well-built man whose chest bore the distinct emblem of a silver star. His face remained entirely concealed beneath a mask, and his figure shrouded in an oversized robe that obscured every detail of his physique, and even his hair. Standing silently behind Viscount Raoul Joseph, the man presented himself as nothing more than a dutiful escort. However, those who knew the truth would have recognized him as none other than Count Balzac, the kingdom's finest sword, a sword master hiding in plain sight under the guise of personal guard. The moment Raoul arrived, a murmur spread like ripples through the banquet hall. Whispers filled the space as apprehension crept into the atmosphere. The arrival of someone from the ducal house was rarely seen as anything but ominous. One guest quietly expressed regret at attending, convinced that nothing good could come from entanglement with the Delphine faction. Without hesitation, Viscount Joseph strode directly toward Marquis Branford. Upon reaching him, Raoul offered a courteous yet measured greeting, acknowledging that considerable time had passed since their last meeting. The Marquis, as host, returned the pleasantry, though the stiffness in his posture betrayed his displeasure. He noted aloud that Raoul had never before shown any interest in such events, making his attendance all the more curious. Raoul offered a faint nod and explained his presence. He had come, he said, to lay eyes upon the young lion that the Marquis had chosen to support. There had been much talk about this Baron Fenris, a man who had not only developed a cosmetic product that swept the capital, but had also captured the attention of powerful factions. Marquis Branford's brow furrowed, and he clicked his tongue as if to brush away a foul taste. His response came sharp and deliberate, declaring that he hoped Raoul's interest would go no further than mere curiosity. As his eyes shifted behind Raoul, he voiced his irritation more openly, demanding to know the identity of the masked individual accompanying him, an unusual sight in such a formal setting. Raoul remained composed, stating that the masked man was merely his escort knight, and hardly someone worth the Marquis's concern. At that moment, Knight Commander Tolio stepped forward. His tone was stern and uncompromising as he insisted the masked man should remove his concealment and reveal his identity, especially in the presence of so many high-ranking nobles. But the figure in question remained still, like a statue unmoved by the demand. No flinch, no voice, no acknowledgement. Tolio, perceiving the silence as insolence, instinctively reached for the hilt of his sword. His command grew sharper, insisting once more that the masked man obey. The tension in the hall thickened as all eyes watched the standoff unfold. Before the matter could escalate further, Marquis Branford intervened, raising a hand to halt Tolio's movement. His voice was firm yet measured, reminding everyone present that Raoul would not have brought someone with malicious intent to the banquet, no matter their affiliation. The statement was a clear line drawn in the sand. Raoul was permitted to remain, but he was not welcome. Raoul offered a cool expression of thanks in response, as if unaffected by the subtle rebuke. Once the formalities ended, the Marquis turned inward with concern. There had been no reports, no indication from his intelligence network that Raoul had even entered the capital. The realization settled heavily. Duke Delphine's influence had reached deeper into the city than previously thought. Meanwhile, Raoul began walking toward Ghislain. The act was casual, but the tension that followed was not. Ghislain had to summon every shred of discipline to restrain the murderous intent stirring within him, especially under the gaze of Count Balzac, a man whose skill could detect even the slightest ripple of aggression. The young ladies who had surrounded Ghislain only moments before had vanished, their presence scattered like birds sensing danger in the air. Raoul approached without rush, his demeanor smooth and condescending, as though addressing a child at play rather than the man of the hour. As their eyes met, Ghislain reached a grim certainty. The Duke's web had indeed spread this far. For Raoul to stand there, unannounced, amidst a banquet hosted by the royalist faction, proved just how little resistance Delphine's spies encountered. Raoul studied Ghislain's expression with mild amusement, and wondered aloud if perhaps the young baron had heard of him before. Ghislain responded with an indifferent nod, noting that tales of the Viscount's exploits were hard to avoid in the capital. The remark seemed to amuse Raoul, who then added that he too had heard about Ghislain, the infamous Baron Fenris, known for stirring up activity in the north. There is a smug undertone in Raoul's voice as he alluded to Ghislain's actions, as if reminding him that every move he made had been observed. Ghislain, aware of the charade, saw through Raoul's feigned innocence. Every underhanded scheme that had weakened Perdium, every attempt to isolate it, destabilize the Scarlet Flame magic tower, and support Amelia's rebellion, bore Raoul's touch. Yet Raoul had the audacity to pretend ignorance, acting as if this meeting were one between curious strangers. Despite the fury boiling inside him, Ghislain knew he could not act. Not here, not now. Still, he could not help but imagine the many ways Raoul might die at his hands. Raoul then suggested they find somewhere more private to continue the conversation, claiming he had something important to discuss. Ghislain did not respond with words, but his silent agreement moved them both to a quiet, prepared chamber within the estate. A tea table had already been set, as if the meeting had been expected all along. Raoul leaned back comfortably as the door shut behind them. He remembered past strategies, the ones meant to isolate Perdium, undermine Dygald, and push the rebellion forward. All of it had seemed to work until Ghislain returned and upended those plans. Not only had Perdium survived, but Ghislain had released a cosmetic product that swept the market, throwing Raoul's own development efforts into disarray. The Viscount wasted no time. He admitted his interest in Ghislain's product, the one rumored to have restored Rosalind's skin and changed the tide of public opinion. Ghislain shut down the proposition with cold efficiency. He made it clear that no cooperation, no discussion, and no courtesy would be extended. Raoul took the rejection in stride, brushing it off as though it had been expected. With a dismissive gesture, he shifted topics, claiming that such mundane matters did not interest him after all. Instead, he leaned forward, eyes gleaming with manipulation, and spoke of wasted potential. A man with Ghislain's talents, he said, should not waste away in some forgotten corner of the north, toiling for nothing. Raoul continued, his voice calm yet sharp, as he reflected on the irony of a once notorious troublemaker suddenly gaining prominence, winning wars, and securing a position of importance in the capital. He questioned aloud whether such developments could truly be chalked up to coincidence, or if it was a testament to genuine skill. Ghislain responded without flair, his demeanor as indifferent as his words. He simply stated that he had studied, offering no elaboration beyond that. Beneath the placid surface, however, raged a fire he could barely contain. Every breath he took felt like a battle against the instinct to act, for his very soul cried out for vengeance. Raising the Delphine faction to the ground had become his life's sole purpose. And Raoul, the architect behind so many of the schemes, sat within arm's reach. But Ghislain knew better. The moment he acted on his killing intent, the swordmaster standing beside Raoul would intervene. Raoul, oblivious to the storm quietly brewing across from him, shifted gears. He acknowledged that his meticulous plan to dominate the north had been flawless, until the arrival of one disruptive element, Ghislain. Without missing a beat, Raoul extended an invitation for a place within Duke Delphine's powerful faction. No response came from Ghislain. Instead, he calculated, eyes scanning for a single exploitable flaw, a fleeting opportunity to slip past the finest sword in the kingdom and deliver one decisive blow. But no such moment came. Still unaware of the death that loomed just across the table, Raoul continued. He spoke of how talent, no matter how brilliant, came with an expiration date. In a brutal frontier like the North, life was cheap, and danger lurked in every shadow. He warned that Ghislain's journey could be cut short by barbarians or war long before his potential had been fulfilled. Many promising young lives, Raoul explained, had already been snuffed out before their prime. And so, he urged Ghislain to entrust his future to the Duke's house. In doing so, Raoul promised all such threats would vanish, and Ghislain's path would be paved in security. Balzac, standing silently at Raoul's back, had already sensed the waves of killing intent leaking from Ghislain like a poisonous mist. He did not draw his weapon. He didn't need to. Should Ghislain make a move, he would be cut down before taking a single breath. And worse still, any attack on a guest at such a gathering would bring heavy consequences. It was then that Ghislain finally responded, his tone respectful yet firm. He stated that he had already pledged his allegiance to the royalist faction. Raoul countered that a shallow pledge did not equate to true loyalty. Dipping one's toes in water did not mean they had plunged in. To sweeten his offer, Raoul mentioned a luxurious estate in the south, ready and waiting for Ghislain and his father, Zwalter. He pressed on, stating how Count Perdium, Ghislain's father, struggled constantly to defend the north from barbarian incursions. Raoul questioned how long they could keep fighting and suggested that perhaps it was time Ghislain considered living in comfort rather than in conflict. It was a familiar tactic, temptation disguised as generosity. Ghislain recognized it immediately. This was how the Delphine faction operated, offering sanctuary and resources while quietly binding others to their will. They believed they could purchase his allegiance and tame his unpredictability. Ghislain, unfazed by the flattery and underlying manipulation, voiced his disagreement. He noted aloud that the north was far from the desolate wasteland Raoul had painted it to be. Raoul offered a knowing smile. He admitted he hadn't expected an immediate answer. He simply wanted Ghislain to consider the offer carefully during his extended stay in the capital. That smile faltered, however, when Ghislain leaned forward and presented a counter-proposal. In an almost mocking tone laced with false innocence, Ghislain suggested that perhaps Raoul should consider joining the royalist faction instead. The audacity of the suggestion stunned Raoul. For a moment, his composed expression cracked as he wondered whether this young lord was dangerously naive or simply fearless to a fault. Eventually, he concluded that Ghislain was simply foolish for refusing a path that could have saved his life. With no further words exchanged, Raoul prepared to return south, his offer rejected. Internally, he scoffed at what he perceived to be a wasted talent. Ghislain, in his eyes, was a gifted individual who had chosen the wrong path. Raoul had seen it countless times, those with great potential extinguishing their own light through poor choices. He believed that, in the end, people like that had no one to blame but themselves. Later, once they were alone, Balzac finally broke his silence. He asked Raoul for his evaluation after seeing Ghislain in person. Raoul, crippled and devoid of martial prowess, nonetheless had a keen strategist's mind. He considered his words carefully before remarking that Ghislain's eyes were unsettling, peculiar to the point that they evoked a primal urge in him to gouge them out. There was something deeply untrustworthy in their gleam. As he considered Ghislain's posture and expression, Raoul described him as energetic and seemingly without fear. He interpreted that fearlessness as arrogance, a dangerous trait in a young noble. He noted the hostility Ghislain barely contained and considered a flaw. But Balzac, ever more perceptive, disagreed. He explained that Ghislain had, in fact, attempted to kill him. Raoul, startled, asked for clarity. Balzac couldn't say for certain, but he had sensed traces of killing intent at various points. It was faint, carefully restrained, but unmistakably present. They both shared a moment of disbelief. Could Ghislain truly have intended to murder a viscount at a public banquet, surrounded by the eyes and ears of the capital? It seemed implausible, and yet the sensation had been real. Balzac elaborated, explaining that throughout their encounter, Ghislain had subtly continued to evaluate him. Every movement, every shift in stance had the precision of someone calculating odds. It was more than just wariness, it was assessment. As a transcendence, Balzac's instincts told him that Ghislain had been measuring whether he could bypass the kingdom's finest swordmaster to strike down Raoul. The idea was staggering. For someone so young to entertain such a notion, even briefly, and to do so while keeping up appearances, that alone confirmed how real the rumors surrounding Ghislain might be. Here stood a young noble, unshaken in the presence of overwhelming power, unafraid to stare down a transcendence. In that moment, their gazes locked. Ghislain and Balzac understood one another, each recognizing the other as a sworn enemy. It was a meeting of equals, of warriors who spoke without words. For Balzac, this meeting cemented a truth. Ghislain was entirely serious in his devotion to the royalist cause. He had not allied with them out of convenience, but out of principle. Had Ghislain actually made his move, Balzac knew he would have stopped him. No matter how skilled the young lord was, his path to Raoul would have been blocked. For a brief instant, the air between them shimmered with tension. It was as if both had silently crossed blades. Though no steel was drawn, the conclusion was clear. Balzac would parry every attack Ghislain dared to launch. For now, however, the swords remained sheathed. Even though Ghislain stood ready to commit everything he had, the towering wall before him remained immovable. The kingdom's finest swordmaster, unwavering and absolute, would not yield. As a transcendence, a being whose power eclipsed ordinary humans, Balzac possessed a vast reservoir of mana, easily dwarfing Ghislain's own. The difference was not only in power but in depth, control, and experience. Ultimately, Ghislain refrained from making a move. The wall he needed to scale was far too high, and he knew it. The storm in his heart subsided beneath the weight of grim pragmatism, and the conversation ended without bloodshed. Yet, even as he kept his blade sheathed, his teeth clenched in frustration. Raoul, momentarily taken aback by the suggestion, couldn't help but admire the young man before him. In the end, he conceded a silent defeat in that moment of exchange, musing that Marquis Branford had indeed found someone extraordinary in Ghislain. With the meeting concluded, Raoul made his way toward the exit, leaving behind only parting words. If opportunity allowed, he said, he would welcome another encounter. Ghislain responded in kind, keeping his composure while stating that he too would look forward to such a day. As Raoul departed, Balzac's eyes remained fixed on Ghislain. He waited, silent and still, until Raoul was completely out of reach. His instincts told him Ghislain had seriously contemplated launching an attack, and even now, Balzac suspected the young noble's thoughts ran along that path. In that heavy pause, Ghislain broke the silence. He formally extended his greetings, his tone composed, and revealed that he had seen through the masked identity. The man standing as Raoul's personal guard could only have been the famed swordmaster, Balzac. Inside the carriage on their return, Balzac acknowledged Ghislain's perceptiveness. He noted that, even in disguise, Ghislain had recognized him. Hearing this, Raoul found himself unable to dismiss the rumors surrounding the young baron. Perhaps there was more truth to the stories than he had first assumed. Still, Raoul insisted that a delayed plan to conquer the north was not a failure. Many options remained, and there was time yet. Even so, he advised that Desmond be warned. In dealing with Ghislain, Desmond should consider him a knight commander-level threat and make preparations accordingly. But Balzac shook his head at such a conservative estimation. In his view, Ghislain was not just a knightly threat. He might well be the strongest swordsman in the north. Raoul lacked the martial instinct to make such a judgment, but Balzac had seen what others missed. Ghislain's every motion, every breath, carried purpose. He had even left subtle openings in his stance, ones that Balzac noticed, but they felt intentional, as if designed to test an opponent's reactions. That realization solidified Balzac's belief. Ghislain was more than formidable. He was terrifying, a warrior born for greatness.